Okay, I'm going to try this again. I tried this and said I wanted to make it 5 minutes, and I did it, and it was 10 minutes. So I got to do that in like half the amount of time. But I want to cover what we did in last week's lesson. We didn't have a very good attendance, so I want to make sure everybody got this because this is some very pivotal stuff about Abraham and this thing that I want to about with you right now about how he is such an archetype. And an archetype is a model or pattern for the way things are or way things are represented in literary terms or in a story, in a movie. It's the way things are. And so Abraham is an archetype of a few things that I want to cover here. And he's a pattern for the call of God, the way God calls us, definitely as men. He's a model for the pattern of the blessings, the way things that we receive. And he's a model for the pattern of believing and what this thing that we call faith. So I want to talk to you all. That's what we talked about in our Bible study. It was a great time. Hate you guys missed it, but let's talk about it. A little bit of the background was that we found, which was a really interesting story, because everybody knows about Abraham being called to leave and go become the father of many nations. But the amazing thing we found out was that before that happened in Genesis 11, his dad, Terah, said took Abraham and his wife and his son's son Lot, and he said, "Let's go. We're going to Canaan." And he left. They didn't go all the way to Canaan. They got to Haran, and that's where they stopped. And and you look at the graphic that I've got there, you see, over here where you've got Babylon and Ur of the Chaldees is where they lived. And Terah, not Abraham, Abraham's dad, Terah got up and said, "Let's go. We're going to Canaan." The issue was they got here to Haran, the midpoint, and that's where his father died, and they didn't ever get to Canaan. So the Bible doesn't say exactly what happened there, but God had already revealed that they were going to, that he had this plan to go to Canaan. He didn't make it. So now, when, so Abraham's got this word now that he's supposed to go into Canaan. All right. He only has to go from Haran down to Canaan, and you see where that is. But of course, the story is, of course, he got to Canaan, and then there a famine came. Famine came, and he ended up going into Egypt. And that's definitely an archetype. Because remember the story that's coming up later on? We have this guy, Joseph, who has risen to power in Egypt. And what happens? His father, Jacob, comes out of where were they living? Canaan, and they have to go into Egypt. So this has happened before for the same reason. There was a famine, and we think there's good stuff that's happening in Egypt. And there was, of course, under Joseph, right? So this is part of the journey. So here's the first thing. He's the archetype of the call. He's the called because this is what God does with us as well. He says, "I want you all to get out and go and have a great adventure." Now, the Lord said unto Abraham, "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house to a land that I will show you." I'm not going to tell you right now, but you're going to this place. You might have gotten a hint because your dad had said he was going into Canaan. Yep, that's the place that I've got for you. All right. And then he goes on in verse C, "I will bless him that bless thee and curse him that curseth thee." And this is the stuff that they were talking about in Israel right now and people are dealing with. All right. Um, so Abraham departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abraham was 75 years old. Another model for the call that you're never too old to answer the call of God. All right. And then there's the blessing. And Abraham, before when he did that thing where they were running from the famine and he went into Egypt, he made up this lie about Sarah being his sister so they wouldn't kill him, trying to save his hide. All right. And so, um, but he went in there and God spoke not only to Abraham, but he spoke to the Pharaoh there and said, "Hey, this is Abraham's wife." And so the Pharaoh got really mad with Abraham and said, "Hey, you got to get out of here. You're causing me problems because you give me your wife. Why did you lie to me?" And he sent him out, but he sent him out with what? Spoil a lot of stuff. So because he'd grown in cattle and silver and gold, he had all this stuff, as the scripture says there, and he got rich off of lying. So the blessings of God don't necessarily just come because you were doing the right things. They come sometimes because of the purpose and plan that God has for you and what he's doing with you. All right. So understand that that's the blessing. And he ends up going back to the place that he was. He leaves Egypt and goes back into Canaan and where he had made an altar unto God. That's what that scripture says. And Lot went with him, and Lot had so much stuff that they just couldn't dwell together because they started having, and it says Abraham in the scripture says he had like 318 servants, and Lot probably had just as many. And because their people were getting into fights, their herdsmen and all the people that worked for them, they were getting these fights. So he said, "Hey, let's separate and That's what they had to do because too much, they had too much wealth. All right. And then the faith archetype is where he had this issue where, of course, and you remember the story where he, can't have he didn't have a son or he didn't have a child. And he says, that's my problem. I don't have a son. And God says, don't worry, I got you. And out of your bowels, you'll have one. And it says in verse 6, a very famous verse, he believed in the Lord and it counted to him for righteousness. It's about belief. That was the beginning of faith. Before then, yeah, we're hearing stuff, we're hearing God, but we have to believe him. That's what makes the difference in the fact that we simply believe God. Because when we believe God, we start doing things. We start doing things because we believe God. That's all. Doesn't mean, and people can judge us, but we do things because we believe God. And so it's not just doing things like Terah, perhaps Abraham's dad. He was doing stuff. Did he believe God? Did he think maybe God's got me going to Canaan? And that's it. Are we thinking about God when we do these actions? Because if you believe God, then God says that's righteousness. And then he begins to unfold things in our lives and makes things happen. Well, the rest of the story, of course, you go to Genesis 16, you get the story of Ishmael happening. Uh, and the problem was back to our in the garden, Adam and Eve. Abraham hearkened unto his wife and does what she says, go into my handmaiden, and he has a child by Hagar. And God has to then deal with Hagar because she's frustrated or whatever. He promises to her that he'll multiply her seed. At that point, Abraham was 86. You get to Genesis 17, God makes a covenant with Abram and changes his name to Abraham because he'll be the father of many nations. Abraham's 99 at this time. And now you're going to actually have your son. And so that's what happens in Genesis 18. Birth of Isaac is foretold. And then the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is foretold as well. And that's where we're going to start this coming week. We're going to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. We'll start in 18 because Lot pitches his tent towards Sodom. And that's a lot to talk about there. So that's it, guys. Hope I see you this week. Okay. Bye-bye.